been 8 years since Kentucky businessman Roy Schaffner and his team of adventurers dug this plane out of a 268-foot ice hole in Greenland. Since rescuing the warbird from its frozen tomb, Schaffner's men have been meticulously crafting a flattened hunk of scrap metal into the rarest of all the World War II fighters, a P-38 Lightning.
When I looked at it lying here on the hangar floor, and I said, fellas, if we put this airplane back together with what we have here, we've got junk. So let's take our time, let's make it the oldest one, let's make it the newest one, and let's make it the best one in the world.
The plane was en route to England at the start of the war, when its squadron was forced to crash land on a glacier after flying into fog and running out of fuel. The pilots walked off the ice cap and left their planes behind forever.
Get your set started, right?
But forever is about to change as the restoration team works to get Glacier Girl ready for its first flight in 60 years.
Where we really want to be is flying, but we're not quite there. The project has taken a lot longer because there's a lot more to be done than we originally anticipated.
More than 10,000 P-38s were assembled at the Lockheed factory. But after Japan's surrender, most were destroyed when world leaders decided to kill the war machine. Schaffner decided the only way to get another back in the sky was to dig one out of the glacier and put it back together, regardless of the time or cost.
There's never been a P-38 of this value or this much history that has been rebuilt. I just hope our restoration speeds up so that I won't be too old to fly it when the time comes.
Up here, see, there's the engine there.
The saga of the P-38 has begun to fade away, and that's one reason Schaffner has invested $3 million in trying to get his plane in the air. It will become a flying tribute to the bravery of America's heroic flying aces, a reminder of a time when the Lightning was the most fearsome warplane in the sky.
Hold on, big friend. Here comes Lightning.
9 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor, the first P-38s rolled off the assembly line in Burbank, California. By the time America entered the fighting, the Lightning was ready for mass production and ready for war. The plane with twin tails looked like nothing that had flown before or since. The Nazis called it the fork-tailed devil. 2 liquid-cooled 12-cylinder Allison engines powered counter-rotating propellers that made the plane the fastest in the world.
Rate of speed? Secret, but better than 425 miles an hour.
To have an airplane back in the early 40s that would go 400 miles an hour was unheard of. And here's a plane that looks very unique. It's all metal, has 2 motors, and it goes very fast. Can you imagine any kid looking at that and saying, wow, man, look at that. I want to fly one of those. The P-38 had 450 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon. Now the 20mm cannon shot a high explosive round. In other words, when that bullet hit something, it would blow up. What made the P-38 so effective was the fact that the guns are in the nose right in front of the pilot.
The 50 calibers could all fire at one time, and they fired straight at you. But when they started firing those 5 guns, there wasn't anything that could stand up in front of it. It's just a solid sheet of lead coming at you.
Here are the fighters, the Lightnings. And the sons of heaven don't like them at all because they strike too hard, and usually only once.
On Easter Sunday, 1943, a squadron of P-38s changed the course of the war in the Pacific. After flying 400 miles across the ocean at low altitude to avoid radar, Lightnings swarmed and shot down a bomber transporting Admiral Yamamoto, killing the architect of Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor.
These Lightning pilots will take on any job because their plane will.
The top flying aces in American aviation history flew and fought from the P-38. Major Dick Bong shot down 40 Japanese planes.
But Dick Bong was lucky.
Lightning pilot Floyd Fulkerson was a squadron mate of Dick Bong's. He also flew on the wing of another legendary fighter ace with 38 kills, Major Tommy McGuire.
McGuire was a superior pilot for Bong. He took chances, and he was the cockiest guy I ever saw. Bong wasn't cocky, up to a point. I mean, we were all cocky, but Bong came back and went through gunnery school, and he was a shot that you wouldn't believe. He just didn't miss. Bong was quieter. McGuire was aggressive beyond belief.
McGuire's daring ultimately cost him his life. In an aerial dogfight, trying to eclipse Bong's record, McGuire stayed up too long and was shot down by a Japanese fighter.
McGuire refused to drop his drop tanks, which is the first thing you do when you get in combat. He just wanted to stay out longer and longer and longer, and if you drop those drop tanks, that limited your range, and that got him.
After becoming America's ace of aces, Bong was taken out of combat. He died at war's end while test flying an experimental jet. On Christmas Day, 1944, after shooting down 2 Japanese planes on his 125th mission, Fulkerson's plane was hit by enemy fire, and he was forced to crash land in the Philippines.
I was unconscious for just a second, and this lady was standing there by a house, and she was screaming. I hollered, "Amigo, amigo," and these Filipinos said, "Come on with us."
Floyd joined a group of Filipino guerrillas, and together they blew up a Japanese railroad bridge. Later, Fulkerson carved a makeshift airstrip out of the jungle and was eventually picked up by a rescue plane. He woke up in the hospital in a full body cast. The crash of his P-38 a month earlier had broken his back.
When our heavy bombers started commuting to Berlin, it was the P-38s who led the way.
P-38s served many functions during the war. They dropped bombs on low-flying, high-speed strafing missions. As dive bombers, they blew up enemy ships and trains.
Down they went to blast his planes and burn them in his airdromes.
On D-Day, they flew up and down the coast of Normandy, taking pictures of the battle, helping chart the progress of the Allied invasion.
The reconnaissance version of it is probably the most outstanding reconnaissance plane we ever had in World War II.
We were the eyes of the 14th Air Force.
Ed Pennick flew nearly 70 photographic reconnaissance missions over China, never with any guns.
Our mission was not to shoot. Our mission was to get the pictures and get back.
He was shot at from the ground and in the sky, but his plane always made it home.
I was hit over Canton, China, and had an engine shot out. I was at 30,000 feet, and I tumbled for about 10,000 feet and didn't know whether to bail out or not. Finally got control of the plane, flew it home, and it had a hole this big through the engine, through the right engine. Very few planes could have come through that kind of damage. It was an easy flying airplane. Once you learned its idiosyncrasies, it's very easy to fly. Didn't have any torque. The propellers were counter-rotating, so you didn't have any torque to contend with. You didn't have the tail wheel to drag the loop. You just put it on the ground and you could just steer it just about like an automobile. It was a real sturdy plane, well built, well maintained by our ground troops.
It takes, 10 men on the ground to keep one airplane in the air. It's primarily preventive maintenance. He tries to find trouble before it happens because the guys can't exactly pull off to the curb and do something when it goes wrong. You change an engine automatically, I think it was 600 hours, so that's quite a long time really in an airplane's life. And usually in combat, most planes don't last that long.
Our country was threatened. I don't think, none of us thought we were brave or heroes or anything of that nature. We were just given our job. And we were trained to do it, and we had the equipment to do it. The two things you had to defend yourself were speed and high altitude.
Well, this thing is a turbo supercharger, and what it makes it possible to do, it makes it a high altitude plane. Without the supercharger, you simply cannot get to high altitude.
While the Lightning could fly fast and high, early in the war, it had the reputation of being a short-range airplane. In the summer of '44, famed aviator Charles Lindbergh was recruited by the Army Air Force to try and get greater gas mileage out of the planes.
He just made it possible for us to increase everything, the efficiency of that airplane, easily 40%.
During a mission to improve fuel consumption, Lindbergh shot down a Japanese plane in the South Pacific, a civilian pilot flying a military fighter.
I asked him while we were there, I said, what do you think of these Air Force pilots? And he said, they take too many chances. And we did.
I always say it was like being thrust back into history 500 years at least. I just felt that I was back in another era, and it was sort of eerie.
No P-38 pilot's story is more harrowing than Charlie O'Sullivan's. A fighter ace with 5 enemy kills, O'Sullivan was shot down over the jungles of New Guinea.
So I went in pretty fast, and I clipped off trees 6-8 inches in diameter, just like a giant lawnmower. And it just drove straight ahead. And I came to a screeching stop, and it was sizzling like a hot potato. I got out of the airplane immediately, grabbed my parachute, and took off without a backward look. I even wrote a poem about my airplane. You are like a faithful, gallant steed, struggling on, although mortally wounded, bearing its riders to safety before the enemy. You ran and ran as if your heart would burst, and burst it did. I rode you hard, and finally, when you could run no longer, you lay down to die in the tall kunai grass. You didn't let me down. It was I who let you down. It was I that let the enemy creep up behind us and send his cruel shots into your sleek body. You saved my life.
4 days after he walked away from his plane, Sully was taken prisoner by a blood-drinking jungle tribe.
They certainly could have been headhunters, and they even could be cannibalistic. They pointed to the moon, and I got the idea that I had arrived at the wrong time of the moon. It was just tough luck, Buster, that you happened to come along at this time of the season.
Just as Sully was sure he was about to be murdered, he shot 2 of his captors with his Colt .45.
He grabbed both of my arms and pinned me back against the wall. And I had the gun in my hand, and I always say with my superhuman strength, I forced the gun down on him, and he's right on top of me, and I shot him and blew him 6 or 8 feet back. When I shot the 2 of them, then the rest of them disappeared like scalded dogs.
After all these years, he still shudders when retelling the story of his escape.
But I thought about saving the last bullet for myself, you know, when they closed in on me, and then I thought, no, that's not the way to do it. And so I made up my mind that I I would fight it out or get away, no matter what happened. And I crawled for 2 hours at least through the toughest jungle and brush I could find. So then I eventually found a mountain stream and got into that, and like a good Boy Scout, I walked in the water and got to a bigger stream and crossed that, and then I took off, barefooted. I'd lost my shoes.
We were married 2 months before he went overseas. I received a telegram from Washington, from the Adjutant General, stating that he was missing in action. And that's all it said. That telegram was devastating, but I had a lot of hope.
I always was hoping that she would realize I was still alive and still out there, and not, you know, being about too concerned. Although when you get a missing in action message, why, then that's pretty grim.
Sully wandered in the jungle for 30 days, eating grass, evading wild dogs and Japanese patrols. Finally, after losing 40 pounds and contracting malaria, an exhausted O'Sullivan was rescued by Australian commandos and sent home to the States.
I was going to just set a time period, how long he could survive the jungle, and you know, I said a month. And I wasn't going to give up. In the morning of a month, on the 30th of October, my brother called up the stairway, and it was 8 o'clock in the morning, and said, "Marilee, your good news has come."
In 1993, 50 years after his crash in New Guinea, Sully's plane was found in the jungle with a palm tree growing through the boom. At first, he wanted to visit the crash site, but he was warned by the men who discovered his plane to stay away.
So then I got a letter, and it was pretty shocking. He said, "I implore you not to come back."
Among the tribesmen who still make their home deep within the jungle, Sully remains a hated and hunted man of mythical stature.
I'm glad they found you. It seems to make our mission complete. May the salvagers and souvenir hunters be kind to you as you so well deserve. So farewell, dear faithful steed, my lightning P-38 fighter plane. Rest well.
There he is, folks, the incomparable Marvin Leslie Gardner, one of the founders of the Confederate Air Force, and the plane he loves to fly and does it so well, the Lockheed P-38 plane.
Since 1964, Lefty Gardner of Austin, Texas, has been flying his own personal P-38 around the country at air shows. Lefty's White Lightning has been in the air more than any P-38 since World War II, racing in competitions against vintage warbirds. He was a B-24 and B-17 pilot in the war, flying bombing missions over Germany. At times, he was escorted by P-38 squadrons.
Well, all during the war, I had to fly bombers because the military decided for you what you were going to fly. Even though all the time I was going through cadets, I was looking at fighters and the P-38 in particular, hoping and dreaming that I could fly that airplane. The uniqueness of it, I think, is the main thing that attracted me, seeing those twin booms and twin-engine airplane, and one man sitting in there all by himself, and that was all his, and he could go fight a war in that thing with two engines. It seemed like he might have an advantage over somebody with only one. I was terribly upset. In fact, my bomber instructor that taught me how to fly a B-24
almost had to beat me over the head to get me to take that thing and fly it. And all during that time, I was very envious of the fighter pilots that were up there flying those things. And it just dwelt on me for so long, for four years or so, or 5, that I just had to have a P-38. And as soon as I got out of the service, I started looking for one.
Lefty is one of the founders of the Confederate Air Force, a national organization that preserves and flies combat airplanes from World War II. He's devoted much of his life to locating warbirds and helping others get them back in the air.
I was interested in preserving as many of the military airplanes as we could to show to our grandkids, our children and our grandkids and future generations what we used to win the big war against the Nazis and the Japanese. And if it hadn't been for these airplanes, we wouldn't have won the war. White Lightning was one of the last P-38s off the production line. The P-38 is so unique in the way it's designed and built that it's, I'd never seen an airplane that looked anything like that. It was a new concept of something that would take you into the air, and it was a thing of beauty.
Lefty has been closely following the restoration of Glacier Girl, and someday soon he hopes to fly on her wing. He's given the team many spare parts he's collected over the last 35 years.
Lefty's been a jewel for us. First of all, he's just a wealth of knowledge as far as the P-38. He's had his P-38 for well over 30 years.
And Lefty Gardner, I called him one day and he said, well, anything I've got 3 of, you can have 2 of them. I said, I like your project, boy.
That one is going to be the most pristine airplane that has ever been rebuilt, I think. It certainly is going to be the most pristine P-38 in the world. It's going to be a priceless jewel flying around the country. The airplane was built to last 1,000 years, I think. It's very strong, was built. And the systems were designed to last forever almost. It's the most fun you could ever have. It's so fun to fly when you get those Allisons all wrapped up with a lot of power on them. They smooth out and get the feeling like a couple of jet engines up there.
The days of aerial racing are over for Lefty Gardner, and the times have become rare when he takes his plane out of the hangar and up into the clouds. But it's his dream that his sons will eventually take over the family business and continue flying his beloved P-38. To honor the brave Americans who once went to war with lightning on their side.
P-38 represents a piece of history that we need to preserve for our own national welfare. Our younger generation and future generations need to see that thing and see that and realize that there was a human being that climbed in that airplane and went out to meet the enemy on his terms and was able to overcome him and shoot him down in most cases, not in all cases, but in most cases. And that helped to preserve our way of life.
This program was made possible in part by a grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the National Educational Telecommunications Association. A home video of when lightning struck is available. To order, call 1-800-662-AETN. For more information about the P-38 Restoration Project, write The Lost Squadron Museum, Post Office Box 776, Middlesboro, Kentucky 40965, or call 606-248-1149.